All right, everyone. We are at another Mold Talks, and I have a very special guest. Her name is Lauren, and I'm very excited to talk to Lauren. Lauren is very involved in this space, so it'll be kind of nice to get some further information out of this. Lauren, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let everyone know why you're here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I am a nurse practitioner and a certified nurse midwife, and I've been working in this space for about 7 years after my health journey that started 10 years ago now. This year was my 10-year anniversary, I guess you could say. And I basically treat people with chronic illness, mold toxicity, heavy metal toxicity, Lyme and co-infections, chronic fatigue syndrome, whatever it is. We kind of get to the bottom of it. I kind of just identify as like a root cause detective, and we get people better.
Totally. So before all that, obviously, like, how did you become to know that mold toxicity was even a thing?
Yeah. Through my own experience, unfortunately. I think sometimes the best practitioners in the space are people who have been through it, because we can literally put ourselves in your shoes because we've
Yeah.
been there and had all those really crazy, weird symptoms that they tell you are all in your head. But I was living in Georgia,
Okay.
super humid. And I was in graduate school at the time. And so you just live like a poor person, we just lived in this crappy, old, not well maintained rental house that was close to campus. And it was like one of those situations where you could actually see visible mold like growing on the
Mm,
doors and the frames around the windows, but nobody ever talks about that being dangerous. And so we lived there for 2 years. And I noticed that I was like getting more fatigued over time, but I always kind of like describe the start of my illness as, it sort of happened overnight. And I always had attributed my fatigue to just being in grad school, and I was delivering babies at the time. And so they don't come,
right.
from 9 to 5, they come at 3 in the morning, and you
Yeah.
got to get up and you go
Yeah.
catch them. So I just thought, well, fatigue is just part of the game. And then it was like I graduated, and from one day to the next, I actually woke up feeling really, really bad, like really bad. And I thought, oh man, I think I'm, have a weird, like, early, like late winter flu or something. And it kind of started with like massive fatigue, headaches, like 24/7 headaches. I mean, it was just like unbearable all the time, joint and muscle pain. At one time, I was sleeping like almost 20 hours a day for weeks on end. I just like could not stay awake. Tremors in my hands and my feet, difficulty swallowing to the point where I lost so much weight. I was like skeletal. I normally weigh 130 pounds, and I'm 5'8", so I'm already really slim, and went down to like 95 pounds. And the
Wow.
doctors just all said, well, it just sounds like you're depressed if you're sleeping all the time and not eating. And I'm like, well, I wasn't depressed, like a month ago. So I don't know what
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Um, and of course went through all of the Western medical realm and got no answers, MRIs and barium swallow studies and ENTs and the whole freaking thing. And one neurologist sort of tentatively diagnosed me with multiple sclerosis because I had a lot of white matter lesions on the brain. And so they kind of wanted to do treatment for that. And I was just like, that, it just doesn't make sense. You don't just get sick overnight with multiple sclerosis, and then all of a sudden you
Right.
can't get out of bed the next day. Um, and I went down the rabbit hole of Lyme disease. I went to go see actually a dentist, which is like this totally bizarre off topic thing, but I went to go see this dentist who specialized in headaches, because at the time I was just so focused on the headaches for some reason, even though the rest of my body was like totally crumbling as well. And I just wanted the headaches to go away. So I went to see him, and he said, well, we can maybe treat you for your headaches, but if you have all these other symptoms, he's like, you should look into Lyme disease. And I was like, Lyme disease, I think we had like one lecture on that, like 2 years
Right.
into grad school that I don't remember at all. Um, and ended up getting just like a standard Western blot, like asked my doctor to order it. And he's like, well, whatever, you don't have Lyme disease, but I'll order it. And it actually came back positive, which is unusual. Most people have to do specialized testing and spend a lot of money to get that. But unfortunately, I think it really brought me down the wrong path. And I ended up doing like a lot of antibiotics, which I really,
Mm.
really, really regret, because I think it essentially destroyed my mitochondria and destroyed all of my gut flora. And then I had gut issues, which I actually never had before. And no one ever talked about mold. No one ever talked about any other environmental toxicities, nothing. My Lyme doc was just, antibiotics and then some supplements, and you'll be fine. In a year, you'll be back to normal. And a year later, I was maybe worse potentially, because now I have gut issues and I didn't have that before. And
Anything but back to normal.
Anything but back to normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he treated me for babesia at the time, and that did help to some extent, because I was having really severe night sweats and shortness of breath, air hunger type stuff. And so I do actually think that piece helped, but the rest was just a total disaster. And then finally, I don't even really know how I stumbled on mold. Like, I can't remember who it was that was talking or what I came across. And I was like, mold. I'm like, well, we did live in that house, for 2 years where I got sick, and it was super moldy, but that couldn't be it, that just definitely couldn't be it. So I started going down the rabbit hole, started going to a lot of like naturopathic conferences. I went to Lyme conferences. I just started kind of just researching like what really makes people sick, and why does everybody seem to have Lyme and nobody gets better. It just, even if Lyme is this smart bacteria, it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me why that would just be it.
Right.
And so that brought me to mold, and I realized that we were living in massive amounts of mold. I wish I could go back to that house and test, because I'm just so curious, like how
I'm
disgusting
curious
it
too,
is.
honestly.
Yeah.
So how many doctors did you actually go through before, you came to this conclusion that, it wasn't anything that I needed to treat internally, it was actually externally caused?
Yeah. I think so. The first year, I think for everybody is always Western med, scans and all kinds of medications. And then eventually you just end up with a psychiatrist, because everybody says everything's normal. So that was probably a year. And towards the end of that year, I was sick of regular doctors and I felt so bad. And so then I sort of ventured out and maybe read a blog or something that brought up, oh no, the dentist. And then I started reading the blogs and I was like, okay, I'll get tested. And then once I got diagnosed, I just started looking for a Lyme literate medical doctor.
Right.
And at the time I was living in Alaska. And there's nobody in Alaska who knows anything about that. So I ended up seeing a doctor in Seattle, and would fly, from Alaska to Seattle to see him a few times a year. And that's what kind of sparked everything. So I think really from Western med all the way through like my LLMD phase was probably like a good 2.5 years.
Wow. That's
before
a
I
long
even
journey.
considered mold.
Yeah.
Because this was also 2011, 2012, and social media wasn't really, Facebook, but Instagram wasn't there. And so it was a different time.
It was blogs at best, right? At that point in time, and so if anybody who wrote blogs, and I would say back then there wasn't a whole of a lot of blogs on mold, and the effects of mold. It was very, I would say, much in a developing, understanding at that point.
Yeah.
Obviously there was mold, in the 80s and 90s that was pretty predominant, and there was a lot of research, but then it kind of just like stopped, and it started picking back up in like the 2010s really, which is, kind of what I've gathered. So you mentioned about a psychiatrist. Did you ever go see one, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I did.
what did they end up saying, with all of this? Like, did they have any take on their point, or they just went right to the depression?
Pretty much went right to the depression,
Hmm.
and suggested I seek a therapist. And then at one point it was suggested that maybe I just have like, I'm just a hypochondriac and I am more aware of my body than normal people are. And I was like, okay, whatever that means.
Whatever
I
that
don't know.
means. With the psychiatrist, I mean, obviously they pinpoint depression, they go to that. I mean, obviously we know the neurological effects of mold today, and we know a lot more how it impacts the mental health. Did you feel that it was impacting your mental health? Like, did it make sense that when they said you were depressed, did you think about it and feel like you were? And do you think that was attributed to the mold, or do you think more just they were just kind of grasping at straws?
I think I think eventually I was depressed because I felt so bad all the time. I couldn't start my career. I had like virtually no life because I was
Right.
so tired. And it ruined everything, all of my relationships, my work environment. And so I think in the beginning, no, I didn't feel especially depressed. I just felt like something's happening and someone needs to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
And then, a year in, yeah, probably did have depression at that
Well,
point.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when your quality of life sinks,
Yeah.
and like, it's not fun to do anything, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
how could you not be depressed? I mean, you're
Yeah.
certainly not going to be happy that you're not feeling well, right? I
Right.
mean, so of
Exactly.
course it affects your mental health. But yeah, no, it's always interesting because they always go right for that. Like, you must have
Yeah.
anxiety or depression, and maybe you do, because you're dealing with these external factors and you have no idea how to fix it, right? So of course that's
Yep.
going to give anybody anxiety and depression, but not the root cause of what's going on, of course.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I 100% agree. I think, if people feel like they need to get on medications or use supplementation to support them during that time, then I'm all for whatever people need. But you have to figure out why you feel that way to begin with. There's always a reason. Always.
Always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you said it about 2.5 years your journey was, where you kind of started to realize like, hey, it probably was that mold that I was exposed to. So what
Yeah.
happened? You ended up moving out of that place into a different place?
Yeah, so we had already moved. I at the time I was like transitioning out of graduate school and I had been offered my first job all the way in Alaska. So it was a really big move. And we almost didn't go because I was really like that was sort of the onset of my chronic
Mhm.
symptoms. But I sort of just thought, like everybody would think, oh, well, this is just some weird viral thing or some flu or something. And so I'm just going to get over it. I think we should move. I don't want to miss out on the opportunity. So we actually moved and brought all of our stuff with us, of course. And um and then yeah, things didn't get better in the new home because I didn't do anything to detox mold. I didn't do anything to remediate any of our belongings. It just wasn't even a thought. So
So you were
I,
still sick in that place?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, very much so.
When did you finally start to turn a corner, and what did you have to do to turn that corner?
I think I finally found, I think there was kind of two turning points for me.
Mm,
One was finding mold and then subsequently heavy metal toxicity. um, because that really sparked the idea of the terrain theory versus the germ theory for me. Because in any Western medical training, you're just trained that like the bug causes disease. And so you have to kill the bug in order to get better.
right.
And in terrain theory, the idea is that your body's overwhelmed with something. And for a lot of people, that's mold. And sometimes it's pesticide toxicity or arsenic or other heavy metals. And so if you remove that, then the pathogens don't really matter as much because they're just part of our biome at this point.
Totally. I mean, even the radiation exposure that we experience too, like today,
Yeah.
is much higher than it's ever been. I mean, with our cell phones, the sun,
Yeah.
microwaves, like all of modern technology emits these frequencies that
Yeah.
penetrate our body and stay in our cells, right? So
Yeah.
it's definitely kind of a toxic world, and I think as a society we probably need to prioritize detoxing a little more than we do. I'm actually
Yeah.
going through a detox program right now,
Yay.
and it is kicking my ass. No joke. I mean, I am like sitting there, I'm doing the sauna, I'm taking all of these supplements, and I am just like, I mean, I'm watching myself go through like mental and physical changes at the same time. And it's really
Yeah.
wild. And
Yeah.
I haven't done any sort of detox in about 7 years. So like with all this stuff that I'm exposed to on a daily basis, it's been like insane. What's interesting is like the first 6 days I was in a sauna, I wasn't really sweating. Like I would have little beads of
Yep.
sweat develop, but I really like, I was totally blocked. By
Yep.
day 7, I'm like sweating profusely. Like, you know what I mean? But it's like,
Yep.
I could tell like, this is good. Like I'm cleaning stuff out.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting. And I think, obviously mold plays a big factor because we breathe so much air every single day, roughly 20,000 breaths per day. You know, that's
Yeah.
a lot of particulate that gets into our body, especially when we're living in a moldy environment. So, you
Yeah.
know, it's crazy to me how we don't, as a society, are not more aware of this. But, you know, I mean, it's kind of where we're at. And obviously there's more awareness today in 2022 than there was in, you know, let's say 2010. So we're on the right path. But, you know,
Yeah.
obviously it's like us talking about it today, right? The more we talk about it, the more people see like that this impacts all
Yeah.
of us. It doesn't matter if we're a remediator, a doctor, nurse practitioner, like we're all, you know, we all have the same body, right? We all
Yep.
are impacted by our environment and the choices we make and what we put into our body and stuff like that. So, you know, unfortunately, mold is one of those things where like you don't make a choice to be in mold, like it just ends up happening, you know,
Yep.
especially with like the way we're building houses today, you know, with COVID and all the shortages of lumber staying outside for much longer than normal before it gets put
Yeah.
up. There's a lot of factors in this. And unfortunately, people are like getting sick before
Yep.
they really wake up. You even said earlier, like you would have had no idea if you didn't get sick yourself, or maybe you would have found out eventually, but
Yeah.
like that definitely brought like a pretty big awareness to you because you're like, crap, I am going through it.
Yep. Yep. I
Yep.
mean, I just, it always blows my mind that people even get into the field that haven't been through it themselves. I'm like, man, I mean,
Yeah.
how do you even get into that? It's just such a, unfortunately, in today's medical society, it's like this fringe thing that no one ever talks about or sees, or, oh, I move into a new build, or my house is new, or, like we maintain it. And so there's not mold here, or, oh, it's just mold around the shower and in the kitchen. Like that's no big deal. That's like
Yeah.
normal mold. And it's just, it's weird how
It is
nobody
weird.
really talks
It
about
is
it.
weird.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're in medical school to become a nurse practitioner, right? You mentioned how there was like one lecture on Lyme. Was there any lectures on mold? Like, was there anything regarding mold at all?
Nothing about mold, nothing about heavy metals, nothing,
Yeah.
nothing,
So it's
period.
interesting because it's like, you know, we go to doctors and we expect them to just like know everything, but they're not teaching them this stuff. They're not teaching them about
No,
environmental exposures,
no,
you know, or if they are, it's very little, right?
yeah. Or they're seeing, and if they do, well, yeah, you definitely don't learn it in school. And then if you sort of get out of school and start thinking for yourself and practicing a little bit differently, now you're the outcast because you're the weirdo.
The weirdo,
Um,
right?
yeah. There's an oncologist here where I like around where I live, and she does a lot of environmental medicine with her patients, and she's actually does pediatric oncology, and will actually send a building biologist to the house, test for mold, test for
Awesome.
EMF levels, air quality, before she'll even treat the cancer, because she's like, sometimes you just get kids out of the environment and they already do so much better and their cancer
Yeah.
markers reduce. And but she's like totally fringe, right? She had to kind of leave the social medical system and like do her own thing because that wasn't supported. And it
Because
just is,
it's because it's progressive, it's alternative, right? It's
yeah,
different. Anytime
yeah,
you think outside the box, you know, actually they call it like the Peloton. I'm not talking about the bike, right? The tip of the spear. Like
yeah,
any people who are the tip of the spear, they're always called like crazy, weird, insane,
yep,
and then like they're worshipped later on. You know,
yep.
it's like this funny thing, like, oh, that was the, you know, godfather or the godmother of whatever it is. It's just kind of
Yep,
how our society works. So we all get shunned first. And what's funny is like all of us, we're just trying to help people, right? Like we just want
yep,
You want people to be
Yeah.
able to fix and heal and do these things so they can live a better life. And honestly, I don't even like, I think if someone were to call me crazy, I would probably be like, really interesting, because all I've given you are facts, right? And I
Yeah.
don't just like make up facts out of thin air. Like the 20,000 breaths per day thing is straight off the American Lung Association website.
Yeah.
Very credible source. You know, a
Yeah.
lot of the stuff that I quote is literally on the EPA's website. You just have to know to go and look for these things and piece it all together, right? But the essential part of it is, I think you have to be very naive when you start to really piece it together. Like we take 20,000 breaths per day, mold produces particles. If I breathe a lot of these particles in, it probably won't make me feel that well. You know, and you
Yeah.
start to look at it together. And I think what is health really? It's a holistic approach to well-being, right?
Yeah.
And so when you go to a doctor and you're like, I want to, see how healthy I am, they're probably going to want to run an array of tests, check all your vitamin levels, minerals, your hormones, right? Like there's different things that you look for. They don't just like check your vitamin D level and say you're healthy, right?
Yeah.
There's all these parameters. So it's very holistic, when we look at health and stuff. So I don't see why we don't do that more when we actually look at our environment and look at health. We have to zoom out a bit, right? Because it's not just the, how our vitamins are. Obviously,
Mhm.
having mold and stuff is probably going to create some deficiencies there. But, it's more of like, is the water we're drinking clean? Is the food we're eating clean? Is the air we're breathing clean? Like this is part of what health really looks like. And obviously, like with air quality and,
Yeah.
it just what you're exposed to in the environment is really not talked about enough at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because in medicine it's very black and white. It's either you have disease or you don't, or you're healthy. There's no gray.
Mhm.
There's no even with mold. So there is aspergillosis in
Yep,
Western medicine,
totally.
which is like you're just totally overrun, right? With
Yeah,
like colonized with mold. And but anything less than that you can't possibly have, right? It's either aspergillosis or
or
there's no
nothing.
such thing as
Yeah,
mold
right.
toxicity. And I always just find it bizarre that we literally have millions of doctors and nurses who can't see that because you talk to, I mean, even when I was going through it, I was just like, and they would look at me weird, like you're doing sauna or what kind of, lab is this? Like Great Plains, testing for mycotoxins and stuff, and just looking at me like I'm a nut. And I'm like, but I feel better. And their response is, well, it's just placebo effect, right? And I'm
Placebo
like,
effect.
well, then then it should have worked with all the antibiotics, the whole placebo effect theory. So it's just weird to me. I honestly don't really understand the psychology of it because I've been in Western med. Like I was trained that way too. But why do we have no critical thinkers in the field? Why is it just we learn this in medical school, A plus B equals C, and that's it? I'll never understand, I don't think.
Yeah, you don't understand because the reason why you're so successful in doing what you're doing, and it's the same reason why I'm so successful in doing what I'm doing, is because we bothered to stop and ask why, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
most people are just trained not to ask why. They're just trained to like, if this is this, the answer is this, right? So for me, when it was right after Hurricane Sandy. I'm in the Northeast. I start going to people's homes to look at,
Mm.
homes that have been that needed repair. And what
Mm.
struck me as odd is for most of the homes that I walked into initially, like they already looked repaired. So, talk to them and be like, I mean, everything looks fine here. What are we doing? Oh, you got to
Yeah.
look at this report. So I'm looking through the mold report and I'm like, there's mold there? Like, well, we already had that remediated, but it wasn't done properly. And sure enough, when you open up the wall, it was like, bam, there's mold. You see it.
Yeah.
And like, so I was like, wait a second. So this stuff can be hidden. That was like one of the first things I realized. Like this stuff can be hidden. This doesn't
Yeah.
have to be this obvious thing. So that was like the first lesson I learned in the field. The second thing I learned was as I started, going to more and more homes, and this happened for like a span of 7 years after Hurricane Sandy. I'm sure there's still houses that haven't been repaired properly, but I started seeing all these people that were like having all these adverse health reactions. There was clearly mold and bacteria in the home. There was lab results proving it.
Mhm.
And, the house looked like it was repaired. So
Yeah.
they just, I started, so I'm like, how come I'm getting better results than these guys, and obviously they're all like insurance restoration contractors. They're more about the cosmetic stuff than the scientific aspects of it. And I think that's what started to click for me. I was like, okay, I get it. So they're not doing things scientifically. Like they're
Yeah.
just removing it and saying they did a good job, but visually it looks good. So that's all that matters. And that's when I started to piece this together. I'm like, wait a second. So yeah, mold, the organism, it produces these particles, spores, toxins, etc. These particles become aerosolized. The HVAC system starts to circulate them around. It enters people's breathing zone and they start to react from it. So it
Hmm.
started to make very much sense to me. Okay, well, then we have to do two things. We have to remove the organism, right, growing in the wall, and then clean up all the particles, the toxins, etc.
Yeah.
And then I think a few years into my career, I started to learn, more about mycotoxins and how there's bacteria present as well. And you have to check for bacteria because that also can be a problem. And I started to see like really the more holistic realm of what restoration actually needs to be and encompass. And so, I haven't really been able to kind of do that. And until I started kind of diving down this rabbit hole and really changing the way I looked at it. Because as a remediation contractor, you have this 3-day class, you're just kind of taught in 3 days, like, this is how you do stuff. Right. And it's like, I mean, I'm still learning new things every single day as
Yeah.
I, reach a new challenge. I'm like, okay, based upon the science, here's how we have to approach this, and let's see how that works, and then adjust from there. I mean, it's very much like an ongoing developing science. So,
Yep.
like, I could tell you 3 days is nowhere near enough
Yeah.
to be in to allow somebody in their home and then actually do something that could either cause their health to be worse or better depending on how well they do it. And I think
Yep.
that's the real scary thing. So like I know on my side of the fence, I'm working on like developing my own standards, trying to we're actually building a school right now in New Jersey,
Mhm.
that hopefully will be done by like April. And then I'm going to like try to just get people into this school and start training other companies to do what we do as well. And just try to get things up to speed. I'm going to do everything I can on the industry. But I think the biggest question I have for you is like, if we look at all that, how do we change things on the medical side of things? Like, how do we get mold and some of these other, indoor pathogens, even heavy metals into these curriculums for the medical community?
Yeah. I think if you can discover a pharmaceutical drug that treats people for mold toxicity, that's probably the
Damn,
only way that you
that
will get
changes
it into the
everything.
curriculum. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, once, Richie Shoemaker really started, investigating mold in the body, and then Dr. Neil Nathan, I thought, okay, now we have the MDs there. We have these
Right.
normal MDs that were working in the system, and they started noticing things, and they started going to their colleagues and saying, hey, like, these people, I think, have mold toxicity. Like, I'm treating them with antifungals, and we're kind of looking at their environment, and they're getting
Right.
better, and they weren't previously getting better. And all of their colleagues, like when I listen to them on podcasts and stuff, all of their colleagues just say, just call them a heretic. Like they don't want to get involved. And so everybody who's really like left the system or started thinking for themselves or really was trying to treat patients outside of this standard, I'm going to give you a pharmaceutical for your problem, they eventually just get labeled as a heretic, and people look at them like they're crazy, which is exactly what happened to Dr. Shoemaker.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
interesting.
it's really weird to me. I don't get it, other than, I guess you've put in, 8 to 12 years of your life to go through medical school and residency, and you're sort of just comfortable in what you've learned, and so you just continue with that. But I still think, people learn new pharmaceutical drugs come out all the time. They learn new surgical techniques all the time. So why is this any different? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. It's something to be said about that. I mean, from where I'm sitting, I didn't really see Dr. Shoemaker become like lambasted by the medical community, but also I'm not in the medical community, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't really know that. But that's a shame, right? Because obviously a lot of the work he did, and there's many others that came before him as well that have really stuck their neck out to help people. But
Yeah.
it it is really interesting. And now all of a sudden, Dr. Shoemaker thinks it's more about the bacteria than it is about the mold. You see all these shifts. I can't tell you what that's about. I think it's about everything. It's like anything
Yeah.
that's growing in your indoor environment that's sporulating. I think, needs to be taken care of, because anything that's continuously producing particles, yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to impact your body.
Yeah.
Another statistic by the American Lung Association, and even the EPA says this as well, is anything smaller than 0.02 microns really has the ability to get to bypass our, kind of defense mechanisms, penetrate through the lungs and into the bloodstream. And so if
Yeah.
you think about that, if you have, typically people have like tens of thousands of spores that they're inhaling at every breath. And that's kind of how this usually works. And it doesn't mean like that you tested the air test shows 10,000, but it means you have, lots and lots of particles that are in your dust. And as you move across the room, your HVAC system turns on, these particles aerosolize, they get into your breathing zone. So when you start to look at it like that, I mean, it's going to overload your immune system pretty quick if you have just tons of these tiny particles passing right through and immediately entering your bloodstream. And I think like that's another thing, we want to talk about mold toxicity and all this other stuff. Well, what about that factor, right? What about just being overloaded by any particle? I mean, think about it like this. If you went outside and there was like a dust storm, like a windstorm that just kicked up a bunch of dust, and you inhaled a ton of dust in a short amount of time, guess what's going to happen? You're not going to feel great, right? I mean, we don't have to create a term called dust toxicity, right? Like we just know that if you're inhaling particles that you're not supposed to be inhaling ordinarily, you're not going to feel well. And I think we try to get like so diagnosy, with stuff. Like we have to create all these diagnoses, just kind of how our system works. We put all these people in baskets, but sometimes we just need to zoom out and be like, look, guys, any particle in a massive amount, like having tons of mold growing in your home or bacteria, is going to produce some reactions. And I think that if we can kind of switch to that and look at it that way, I think it'll be a lot easier to kind of come together and figure out, okay, yeah, this probably is a problem just based upon that fact alone. Then we don't have to go down this rabbit hole of like fighting over mold toxicity and what causes toxicity and, all this other stuff, because that's going to require tons of money in research and test subjects. And guess what? The government is not donating tons of money in research to this. As a matter of fact, I think last year they donated $1 million to mold research. Literally. It's insane. I mean, we give billions of dollars to countries when they need help, and we $1 million. For mold, like that's in the realm of research. That's not a lot of money at all. And so I can kind of see like why we're at where we're at. And what I'm hoping is that more awareness kind of wakes people up. And then we start to demand the government, like, this is something that we care about. We need you to do this research. I mean, the EPA is a 20-year study, still ongoing. I've already wrapped up your study for you. Here, it's a problem. Here you go. It's on a silver platter. Here's thousands of people. I have data for thousands of people that have been sick from this. Here you go. Close your 20-year study. Like, it's just, I think they're just not sure how they're going to deal with it. And it's like, if we're donating all this money to infrastructure, right? Like this is part of infrastructure. Like we need to have healthier environments, and also people need to have the proper information, because, like if you had the proper information, you probably would have been like, you know what, we got to get out of this place. We just have to get out. And that would have given you, your health back a lot faster, because you would have had a lot less exposure. So we just need to get the information out, let people make educated decisions for themselves, and let's start to plan around how we deal with the infrastructure on a massive scale. I mean, that's the way I look at it. And it should be as simple as that, because everything else seems to be as simple as that.
I know, but I fear it's not, only because then we're saying that we have faith in our government to make good decisions for our health, which we have seen a million times over with cigarettes, x-rays on pregnant women, like DDT, you name it. It's been a very long history of chronic poisoning. I mean, we see it in little towns. I mean, all the time, people are chronically poisoned by big companies and factories that are protected by our own governments. And so I think that unfortunately that like nobody's really looking out for us in that way. I mean, look at our food system. It's
Totally.
absolutely disgusting.
Well, I will
So
say this, and this is why, like, like we had that Monsanto lawsuit, several
yeah.
Monsanto lawsuits, right? And we started to understand more about glyphosate. But like, let's look at it like this. A lot of these guys, they hire these independent companies to test their
Mm-hmm.
products. Obviously, they're paying them to test them, so they're going to be more
Yep.
favorable to them,
Yep.
right? But then they take these reports and then they provide them to the EPA or the FDA, right? And they say, look at our product, it's amazing. Look at what it can do. And they
Yep.
just kind of bury the negatives. And
Yeah.
then so the way the system is set up, it's like there's really no checks and balances. The EPA, the FDA, they look at this and be like, this is great. Let's go for it. And then it
Yeah.
takes someone getting sick and then someone getting sued for the EPA and FDA to be like, huh, that wasn't what you said it was.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, maybe we need to revisit kind of how we, approve things,
Yeah.
and so I try not to be like so doom and gloom and blame the government just because, hey, I'm going to need the government's help eventually. So, if you're listening, guys, I hear you. Uh, so I try to, because I really think that just these companies, I really think that there's just these companies that are just jerks. Like
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
something, they don't care, they suppress the information, they pay, a ton of money. From my understanding, to get like an EPA approval, it's like $100,000 process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you look at it like that, it's like, if you have 100 grand, and these big companies are billionaires, they have lots of money, 100 grand is nothing for them. It's very easy for them to hire people who will do it. It's kind of like in the mold world, you can hire somebody who is like going to give you an unbiased, like, this is the lab data. And then you have another guy who will come in and like, based upon a visual inspection, this place is fine. So it's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of how it works, right? You have these two sides of the coin always. And, I think we just need a better way of like really identifying and finding out, like, there's got to be certain tests that products have to go through rigorously. Like, I could tell
Yeah.
you, Europe is way better at it than we are, right? At vetting their products before they get some sort of stamp of approval and allowed to go to the
Yeah.
marketplace. Maybe we can start by looking at what they're doing and kind of emulating that. But yeah, I see, so many different little problems in different areas that kind of all come and tie together. And it does seem, like you said, kind of not as simple as one would hope and very convoluted, but I am hopeful that, an army of us can come together and we have, all these experts and stuff that want to see this change that can help kind of create the change. And I think that's what I'm hoping is going to happen, this decade.
Yeah. I hope so. I would love for that to happen, that, profits are not as important as people. And
Totally. They're
we
not.
would, they
They're
are
not.
not,
You
but
can't profit if you don't have people, by the way. Just want to throw that out there.
true, very true.
So
But I mean,
we
it is a nice big loop, big ag gives us shitty food, and then big farm
Mhm.
gives us shitty medication. The medication makes us sick, so we need more medication. It's a really nice system they've got going.
Yeah, when you look at it like that, you're not wrong.
Yeah. But you can tell I'm a little bit jaded with the whole
Hey,
system.
listen, I think when
Yeah.
when you go through what you went through, going to all these different doctors and like not getting the answers you need, and end up getting pointing in all these different directions, and basically they tell you you're crazy and depressed and stuff like that. How could you not be jaded, and I think
Yeah.
it's, when I look at this, I'm looking at like, look at all the people that are impacted. And this is just the people that know they're impacted, right? Like, there was a time earlier that you said, you had no idea, right? And you were
Yeah.
impacted. So if we go back to when you were at that stage, there's got to be millions and millions of
Yeah.
people that are impacted and have no idea. And it's just because we're not doing a good job giving the information out.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you or I specifically, I think we're trying to do everything we can, but, just as a society, the EPA, and we could definitely do a better job of, what to look for, how to look for it, how to prevent it. And, it is a health hazard, right? None of the 50 states call mold a health hazard, which is insane to
Yeah,
me.
it's insane. Yeah. I mean, and I would say 99% of people in the industry, just even, we were considering building a home at some point, and just even interviewing architects and builders, I said, one of my main things is I want to make sure we have, mold prevention strategies in place, better
Totally.
systems where there's water, and they look at me like I'm just nuts,
Yeah.
like I don't know, this material can't get moldy. I'm like, metal can get moldy, plastic can get moldy, like they can all get moldy.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's really hard in the industry too to even find somebody that takes you seriously with wanting to do a little bit of a different system or use a different material or have a different foundation. And I think that makes it difficult for people, and it sometimes feels like, oh, you just have to have millions of dollars to kind of get a home that's relatively safe and doesn't off gas a million things, and talk about using toxic chemicals in the building process, not just mold. I mean, there's so much. So I think that's frustrating for a lot of people, and a lot of my poor patients who are stuck living in mold, but they can't find anything any better. They go to all these homes and they're all moldy too. And
it is really like an epidemic in this country, and honestly, it's probably across the world. Because, I have people that call me from all over the place, and, they're dealing with issues in England and Ireland and here and the British Islands, and it's just everywhere. Right. And it's a lack of knowledge that allows it to happen in the first place. Like, it starts with the way we build our homes, right? We build these homes, and the way we build them, they're very airtight. There's no air exchange. So we're kind of living in these, these boxes. Our volume of air is much less. Then they don't build them with any, as you said, mold prevention technologies. So the water comes in, mold starts to grow, and now we're just in this tight box breathing in all this mold. So, I mean, it's no secret, right, that we have to fix that. So that's like the stage one of how it happens. And then, of course, we need to understand how to deal with it, past events properly, because think about it like this. I own a home for 10 years. Okay. And we have a couple leaks. I take care of it, but I don't remediate it properly because I don't know any better. And then I sell you my home. And then you say, has there been any water damage events? I'm like, yeah, sure. But I took care of them, Or like, okay, great. That's fantastic. You get a home inspector. The home inspector's like, place looks immaculate. Congratulations. You buy the house, you get sick. Why is that? Because I didn't remediate it properly, because I didn't know how to, or that I had to.
Right.
And it wasn't affecting me just because, I don't know, I didn't spend as much time at home. Maybe I worked more. Maybe I, only really spent the 8 hours sleeping there, and that's really it. Whatever it may be. But then you move in and now you get sick. And this is kind of how it all starts. So it's like, we need to understand, how do we deal with water damage when it happens appropriately so we can minimize the impact of mold? How do we build homes properly so we can minimize that? What about these other crazy situations that I'm sure you've heard of? I've had like people renovate like kitchens and bathrooms and stuff. It's like one of the people love to do that first time they move into a home. They're like, cool, that kitchen is not my kitchen. Now it's my kitchen. Right. And so they renovate. The renovation contractor doesn't know mold, because I don't know, why would we teach our renovation contractors about mold when they probably encounter it all the time? I have no idea, but that's what we do. He just builds right back over mold. I've literally had to walk into people's homes and be like, cool, yeah, it's a brand new kitchen, but there's insane amounts of Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Aspergillus behind that brand new kitchen. And the only way to get to it is to remove that brand new kitchen. It's like heartbreaking, right? It's like, I would have, if I just knew before all that, I would have had this done first, and would have cost me half, what it's going to cost me now. And this is the kind of stuff that happens. And this is like why, as a society, we get sick, because we just don't have the right information.
100%. All of it. Yeah. And it's extremely costly. It's costly. It's a huge financial burden for people.
Totally. I think like the reason why is because typically you're inheriting like 10 to 15 years worth of problems that you now have to fix all at once. Like, it's very difficult. And you're like, well, we kind of live in this litigious society where it's like, well, who's responsible? It's like, well, can I sue the home inspector? Can I sue the previous owner? Like, can I sue the person who built the house? Like, what do I do? And,
Yeah.
the reality of it is, it's kind of like, it's a very gray area.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most people in that situation, they typically are stuck dealing with all of the problems. It's
Yeah.
like, you now own the home, you now own all these problems. And I'm not saying that's fair, but that's like the harsh reality, right? And so what I always tell people is like, look, if you're going to buy a house, and I don't care if it's new construction or, it's been built for 10, 15 years, get a mold inspection when you buy the house. And this is why, because you need to know what it's going to look like for you to fix that house if you want to move forward.
Yep.
And I always tell people, don't buy at the height of your budget. Like, give yourself some wiggle room so that, God forbid you're staring down $50,000 in cost to fix this place, you can afford it. And I think if we start to kind of shift the way we buy homes in that regard, that's going to help us too. And, unfortunately, it's going to be every person that buys a home is going to be dealing with these problems. However, if you think about it, if we do this right over the next 10, 15 years, guess what happens? Houses start to become cleaner.
Yep.
So it's, there's a lot of ways to kind of tackle the problem, all of which require money. So we have to confront that part. But the way to do it is just to do it in a way where you can confront it and control the situation.
Yep.
Instead of relying on other people, which is, kind of what I feel like we do right now. It's like, well, nobody told me that there was this issue, or the home inspector should have caught this. It's like, I get that for sure.
Yeah.
But this is just kind of how the way the cookie crumbles right now. And we have to kind of know how that works so we can be ahead of it, not be the effect of it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the whole personal responsibility piece too is, it's kind of a slap in the face, the first time you realize that, nobody is responsible for this, and nobody cares about you the way that you care about yourself. So when I got out of the mindset that somebody else was going to fix my issues, like everything got better, because, I need to learn the information. I need to rely on myself. I need to find the right people to do the job if it's something related to building whatever, because I'm not an architect or a builder or a remediator. And yeah, I mean, it's freeing in a way, but also terrifying, because there's no fallback.
There's no fallback. You are the calling all the shots there. And but you have to be an advocate for your own health, because honestly, like you said, who else is gonna, and maybe family, but other than that, like, who else really cares about your health the way you do? So tell me about, like, kind of the journey of how this went. Like, once you started to heal and you started to see this, you obviously started to study what was happening, and you've kind of turned your tragedy into a way to help people. We'd love to kind of explore how that happened, and kind of bring us up to present time here.
Yeah. So I, it was kind of this timeline where, I found mold, and I found just this idea of terrain theory and toxicity in general. And so I just knew, okay, I just need to strengthen my body. I need to support my body. I need to do things that regulate my nervous system and support my circadian rhythm. And really, I just changed, like, I stopped delivering babies, because that was just, I mean, it's incredibly stressful job. I'm always in awe of people that can do that their whole careers, because it's a lot of work. I left to just work in the office, and that helped me have more time to do this detox stuff and figuring things out. And then I really got into mind body medicine, and learned about the work of Joe Dispenza and his story, and really just made a lot of connections with not just toxicity in the environment, but like cultural toxicity, emotional toxicity. I mean, the world now, like, if you really think about it, it's like really crazy what we've all just said. Sure, like, I'll live like this. Like, no, like, life kind of sucks now. Like, you just go to work from like 8 to 8, maybe, you're working 10, 12-hour days, 60, 70 hours a week. you come home, you're exhausted, or you just throw yourself in front of the TV and then pass out on the couch and then make your way to bed. And then you do it all again the next day. And maybe you're driving through a fast food joint or getting whatever your work offers for food. And it's like, if you have kids, you don't see your kids, you don't see your spouse. Then the weekend comes and you have so much shit to do at home, like clean the home and do your laundry and then just prepare for the next week. And then it's just on repeat. And everybody's just said, okay, to this thing that we've done. And we no longer have support systems or communities of people that we rely on. It's all just, I'm in my house, you're in your house, like to hell with you. I'm just doing my thing. And I just like, this makes no sense anymore. Like I can't go back to the regular world anymore.
Yeah.
And then
COVID's really destroyed community too. I mean, it's
totally.
like, we were literally like scared to hang out with one another, and it's been a journey. I think we're going to have to seriously, rebuild communities that just to like normalize, like hanging out with people in community and like not being afraid of a stranger. I think it's going to be interesting seeing how that happens, kind of progressively over time.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's so
It really
sad.
is. It is.
So I just got kind of sick of it because I think when you're that ill and then you start recovering, you just see the world differently and you see the way you want to live your life differently. And that like mainstream doesn't really make as much sense anymore.
Yeah.
And so then I just said, to hell with Western medicine. I was so sick of it anyway, because I felt like working in the clinic, mostly women's health, but they would come in with recurrent vaginal yeast infections or like, period problems. And I'm just like, here's some birth control pills and an antifungal and like, see you later. Like no question about diet, no question about environment, like relation, like nothing. And so I just said, this doesn't work for me anymore. I just feel like I'm not doing good anymore. And so I just quit. Honestly, it was a very sudden decision. I just quit my job. I had luckily saved up some money at this point again, and I moved to Spain. I just said, I just sold all of my stuff and I said to hell with it. And I moved to Spain. And I knew at that point I wanted to kind of start my own clinic or start coaching people or counseling people in some way, but I wasn't really sure exactly what it would look like. And then it just took off. And that was,
That's
5 years
awesome.
ago.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, it's definitely a happy ending. And obviously you're helping other people have their happy endings too. So that's amazing. I really appreciate all that you do for everyone out there, and, how you really got empowered by this and now are like turning it around and helping other people. And that's not easy to do. For some people, they just want to put it behind them and like never deal with it again. And so, I really appreciate everything you're doing. So if somebody wants to work with you, you mentioned you're in Spain, but do you see people from all over the world?
I do pretty much everywhere from Europe all the way to the West.
Fantastic.
The Asian countries and Australia and New Zealand are too hard with time changes and supplements and things. But yeah, I work with people all over the world. Right now, I'm booked through June, so I'm not open to new patients at the moment, but I am starting an educational platform for people with videos on moles and metals and gut dysfunction and like all the things. And so I'm hoping that will be helpful for people. It's been a labor of love.
So awesome. When do you anticipate that being done?
March 1st. I'm putting the date on the books. Yeah.
All right. Well, pressure's on now.
Yeah.
So where can people find you if they want to, learn more about you, your practice, even though you're not seeing new patients right now? Maybe they want to get on a waiting list, or maybe they're interested in this educational platform. So where can people get all that information?
So either my Instagram, it's at 2purplecarrots, or my website, just 2purplecarrots.com.
That's awesome. Great name, by the way.
Yeah. Has nothing to do with mold, but I started it and then it stuck. At one point I was like, I should change my name, and everybody voted no. Like, no,
I vote no too. I like it. I think it's unique and I think it's cool and easy to identify. So, so what is one thing, if you had to recommend to somebody, like what's the one thing you would recommend to them who may have been dealing with similar problems that you've dealt with?
Yeah. Well, first the environmental check, make sure you're living in a clean environment. But second is really the foundations, because I think modern society just naturally makes us sick. Um, because yes, toxicity is one piece, but the rest of it is all just as important. And so working on foundations like sunlight, nutrition, healthy habits, going to bed on time, stress reduction, meditation, all of those things are just as important, if not more important, than pushing it in the sauna and taking a bunch of supplements and doing coffee enemas. So you always got to start with the foundations. And anytime somebody's not progressing or we're stuck, I'm always like, okay, let's take a peek at your foundations again. They're like, yeah, I'm not going to bed till 1 a.m. and like my nutrition kind of slipped. I'm not eating breakfast. I'm like, okay. And I actually learned this lesson over and over and over again with my clients, because I had one client, this just happened the other day, and I was talking about it on Instagram, and she was not eating in the morning. And when you have adrenal dysfunction and mold toxicity, like that's just a no-no. Like women especially need to eat 3 meals a day. And she said, yeah, I just don't know why I feel shaky and like irritable by noon. And I'm thinking, she's like, yeah, I do my workout in the morning and I do a coffee enema in the morning, but by noon, I'm just really cranky. So I'm like thinking of all the possible medical reasons that this could be. And then she's like, oh, but I don't eat breakfast. Do you think that's it? I'm like, you do a workout and a coffee enema and you're not eating breakfast? I'm like, yes, of course you're irritable and cranky. I would be irritable and cranky.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm like, yeah, foundations, man.
Key to the foundations. Well, thank you for that piece of advice. Yeah. All right. So anything else that you want to say before we end off for today?
I think just don't lose hope. That's what I see most often in this community, is that people lose hope. And there's so much hope out there. I mean, there's so many things you can do for your health. There's so many different ways you can go with it. And so just don't lose hope. Things will get better.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I really appreciate that. I agree. Do not lose hope. We have many information out there at this point. So, just got to really find what's right for you and what makes sense for you. There's, practitioners, there's remediation, there's DIY approaches, there's things you can do to take action today. And so don't lose hope is a good one. Well, thank you so much for being on the Mold Talks here today and for sharing your story with me. I really appreciate it. I know it's going to be helpful to many others out there. So really, I thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect.